I was on Ryu. Yeah, I think you're enjoying to stay with my mom. No, I agree. You guys are my lives. Besides,
Okay, one more tech check. Ryan, can you hear me? Okay, one more time. Hey, Ryan, can you hear me? Okay, now you speak. Can we hear you?
Hi, good morning.
Excellent. Well done. Okay, so I'll hold this. Okay. So, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. And my name is Edward Cunningham. I'm Director of China Programs here at ASH's Rajawali Foundation Institute for Asia. I want to start with a few announcements on behalf of the ASH Center. First, the ASH Center would like to acknowledge the land on which Harvard sits as the traditional territory of the Massachusetts people, and a place that has long served as a site of meeting and exchange among nations. Second, this panel is being live streamed and recorded. So should you like to make remarks or ask questions during the Q&A session, at the end, please wait until our staff member hands you the trusty mic. That way it actually works. And that recording will be made available on the ASH Center's YouTube channel. Third, on the left and right screen here, you'll see a QR code. So for those of you who have not yet done so, please register just so that we can, as we move forward with more events, we can capture you and make sure that we're sending you the right information effectively, right? So finally, we'd like to acknowledge and thank the Taipei Economic and Cultural Office in Boston for help making today's panel possible. So what I'd like to do at this point is just ask Director General Jonathan Sun to say a few initial words of welcome here and to set some of the context before I then will talk a bit further about why are we all here, and then we'll turn to the speakers and we'll have a Q&A. So with that, Jonathan, over to you, and maybe hold this because this, yeah.
Good morning. Thank you so much for attending today. On behalf of the Taipei Economic and Cultural Office in Boston, I want to express our sincere appreciation to the ASH Center of Harvard Kennedy School for co-hosting with us this panel discussion, which we think is timely and important because actually just 2 weeks ago on September 14th, the Ways and Means Committee of the U.S. House of Representatives actually held a hearing on this topic. And Mark Wu, the director of Europe Fairbanks Center, was also one of the witnesses. So I think I will be talking more about that. So just to frame today's discussion, I just want to give you some background information of Taiwan-US trade relations. Actually, our bilateral trade relations remain robust. In 2021, Taiwan was the 8th largest trading partner of the US, and the US was Taiwan's second largest trading partner. Our bilateral trade between our two countries reached $114.1 billion US dollars, which was a 25% increase over 2020. We think that's remarkable. In addition, Taiwan was US 10th largest export market and the 6th largest consumer of Taiwan's agricultural goods. If you look at the per capita consumption, actually, Taiwan was the 4th largest consumer of US agricultural products. Just a few days ago, we have agricultural goodwill trade mission. They were in Washington, D.C. They signed 3 letters of intent to purchase more than $3.2 billion US dollars worth of corn, soybean, and wheat from the US between 2023 and 2024. They also traveled to 7 Midwest states to explore more trade opportunities for the future. Someday, we hope they can come to Massachusetts and England. I think the COVID-19 pandemic has once again proved the importance of trade resilience. As a country that highly depends on foreign trade, Taiwan knows very well the importance of diversification, which we hope to be able to achieve through bilateral and multilateral tracks. Bilaterally, we hope to be able to sign bilateral trade and free trade agreement with like-minded partners. And multilaterally, Taiwan seeks to join regional economic and trade frameworks and agreement, such as the CPTPP and the US-led Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity. Even though we haven't been able to join the APEC, however, we hope to be able to achieve that through the newly launched US-Taiwan Initiative 21st Century Trade. We also hope to be able to sign the bilateral trade agreement with the US as soon as possible. Actually, Taiwan has been looking for ways to deepen trade ties with the US. Every year, we organize one of the largest delegations to come to Washington, D.C. to attend the Select USA Summit. And also, Taiwan's Ministry of Economic Affairs also hosts annual US Business Day event in Taiwan. And this year, for the first time ever, we're going to have this Taiwan Expo USA in Washington, D.C. at the Ronald Reagan Building and the International Trade Center, which will be featuring 5 different areas that Taiwan is strong about. So we just want to encourage US business to take advantage of these venues to expand trade dealings with Taiwan. And our office here is very willing to help provide any kind of information or assistance that you need. Finally, today we're very fortunate to have this all-star panel over here to talk about this important issue. They're from Taiwan and the US. I very much look forward to their insights and suggestions. Thank you very much for coming.
So thank you, Jonathan. So why are we here? Our goal today is to really incorporate 3 perspectives: industry, US policy, and Taiwan policy, related to challenges that are arising in tensions between the current bilateral approach that the US is adopting and the more multilateral approach I think that Taiwan would prefer. I hope the discussion also explores some of the underlying assumptions, though, as well. Taiwan's goals of entering traditional multilateral agreements or bilateral FTAs obviously make clear sense politically. But what if they would not have much broad economic benefit and help meaningfully diversify the economy, like Jonathan just stated, and also, probably more importantly, diversify the economy away from the PRC? What if the benefit is found more in something that's harder and more complex, which is dismantling a lot of the non-tariff barriers in Taiwan, rather than that traditional approach of market access, issues around sanitation, digital IP, services, currency, and maybe most importantly, trade secrets, right, which is arguably potentially the real sticking point to enhancing ties between Taiwan and the US when it comes to semiconductor joint investments and production. As Jonathan stated, our colleague Mark Wu testified recently, he's the head of the Fairbanks Center now, in front of the House Ways and Means Committee. And he argued Taiwan's economy has two faces. Taiwan is a global leader in semiconductors, and Taiwanese firms are important players in the ICT sectors. In 2019, the World Economic Forum ranked Taiwan as the 12th most competitive economy, 4th in terms of innovation capacity. However, Mark testified, Taiwan's economy has shown signs of structural weakness. Taiwan has not succeeded in diversifying its economy and faces declining economic competitiveness outside of the high-tech sectors. As is true of many advanced economies, Taiwan is grappling with problems of wage stagnation, aging population, inequality, and talent shortage. So that was what he said. That's how he started. Mark and many others, I think, have argued fundamentally it's nearly impossible for Taiwan to enter into meaningful multilateral trade frameworks, particularly related to the US, because of pushback not just from the PRC, of course, but also from other Southeast Asian nations. So then what happens? The next level of cooperation, many point to, is some form of formal preferential trade agreements. That traditional approach to market access could have some benefit. If you look at it from the US perspective, let's say in agriculture, for example, because there are high tariffs there. But what Mark points out is that only about 20% of the most competitive US export products face any type of tariff rate greater than 5% in Taiwan, so about 20%. So perhaps it's more about other issues, other non-tariff issues that are more critical. That's just something to place out there. I thought it was a great point, and it's an important context on the political, but also the economic aspect, because again, this is about the economic trade relations. So today we are fortunate to have two wonderful speakers in person and one wonderful speaker virtually, but who very much wanted to be here in the flesh. Let me start with Simon. Simon Nip is the president of AUO Display Plus here in the United States, a member of the global AUO group. AUO is a market leader in LCDs, other display panels, major player in energy, solar, employs over 38,000 people worldwide. Simon graduated MBA from U Chicago, high honors, worked for Goldman and Morgan Stanley. Then I think rightly saw the light and escaped banking and built and sold a whole bunch of successful startups in the financial sector. And then he embarked on a long corporate career that brought him to Boston. And one thing that I despise about Simon is that he is a long distance, basically a triathlete. So it's these athletes, these type A's that just drive me crazy. As I suffer, as I did yesterday along the river. So that's Simon, and he'll lead us off from the industry perspective. Then we'll move to Professor Phil Hsu, who's currently a visiting fellow at Brookings, actually along with Ryan, which I didn't realize originally when I thought about putting this panel together. At the Center for East Asia Policy Studies, he's also currently a Fulbright Scholar. In his normal life and his day job, he's a professor of political science and director of the Center for China Studies at NTU, National Taiwan University. Long served as an advisor to the Taiwanese government, of course, serving on the Mainland Affairs Council, Advisory Committee, advised the Executive Yuan. He has published widely in international relations, comparative politics, and is a graduate of the Department of Political Science at NTU, received his doctorate from the University of Denver. Virtually, we are pleased to have Ryan Haas, who gets extra points, I think, from his wife today by staying in DC, and who is a senior fellow and the Armacost chair of the Foreign Policy Program at Brookings, where he holds a joint appointment to the Thornton China Center and the Center for East Asia Policy Studies. From 2013 to 2017, Ryan served as director for China, Taiwan, and Mongolia at the NSC, the National Security Council. And in that role, he advised President Obama and senior White House officials on all aspects of U.S. policy toward China, Taiwan, and Mongolia, and then coordinated the implementation among different agencies as that role is designed. Before all this, Ryan served as a Foreign Service Officer in Beijing, Seoul, Ulaanbaatar, and domestically in the State Department Office of Taiwan Coordination and Korean Affairs. He graduated from the University of Washington and attended SAIS at Johns Hopkins before joining the State Department. So, with that intro, I will now turn to our lovely speakers to share their views for about 10 minutes each, starting with Simon from industry, second Ryan from the US, and Phil from Taiwan. Then ask them some questions to get rolling. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Simon. We will stay seated, I think is probably the way to handle this best. Simon.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Good morning. I just came back from Taiwan on Sunday. And I'll be, on the flight, I'll be wearing mask for like 25 hours. And no mask today, I feel the air of freedom here. So we're happy to be here. As mentioned, right, my background is in investment banking and finances and the company sector. I presume most of the audience here today from academics, students, teachers, right? So if I may, maybe I can share some stories from the dark side. What I observed from the dark side, banking, all these things about trade and international cooperation. So 10 minutes, 3 topics. One thing is about my personal experience. Again, I'm not writing academic papers, all these things, but maybe 3 sharings. Number 1 was trade. Right. Number 2 is some observation about trade these days. What are we trading? And the third one is some practical experience in my last 12 years in Boston, working for high-tech companies in Taiwan. That's perhaps why I'm here today, because actually in my career in the last 25 years, I work for Taiwanese companies and work in financial services for Taiwanese companies, and my only 2 startups, so all Taiwan, last 25 years. So 3 topics. First one, trade. Okay, so which country, which city in the world has the freest trade in the world? Trade. What place, what city, what country has the freest trade in the world now?
Singapore.
Singapore, right? Singapore. I work in Singapore because my wife worked there, so I went there and see her. Singapore is free. I would argue the freest trading place in the world was Hong Kong in the 1980s. I was born in Hong Kong, I saw it. 1980s, 1990s, trading is booming like crazy in Hong Kong. At that time, China is opening up. There's a lot of trading activities through Hong Kong. Hong Kong has the biggest port in the world at that time, bigger than Hamburg, bigger than any other port in the world, right? I was in the shipping industry, trades everywhere. So to me, that is a utopia of trade. All free trade. I've never heard about custom, sales tax. What sales tax? Never heard of it. Right? Tariff, what tariff, right? Freedom of trade is enormous growth, amazing growth. For fresh graduate, I'm old. I graduated from college at that time. Every year, my salary increased like 15%. I'll be insulted. Company pay me 10% increase. I change the job, get 30%. Enormous growth. Great for students, great for people who study hard, work hard. Trade can be very free. It works. Okay. The only trade barrier I heard about at that time was a quota on textile import to the United States. Right? There are companies who own the quotas. In order to import textile to the United States, you have to get a quota. And they make a lot of companies rich. They have a quota. They don't make the clothes themselves. They sell the quota. But you know what? Even if that's the case, the property rights, the game rules are very clear. It's still very efficient. Yeah, they make a few family, a few companies very rich. They own a quota, but things are moving fast. Everything's good. So that's my impression of trade. All free, nice, moving on. Yeah, the average size of company in Hong Kong at that time, less than 10 people. These days we talk about startup is so cool. I got a startup everywhere at that time. Trading, all kinds of ideas. I can trade pencil, textile, and it's an incredible time. So that trading is good. Okay, so I in school I read Paul Krugman, all these trading theories, right? Ricardo trading theory, right? Comparative advantage. How long was it? 200 years ago, 300 years ago? I find it amazing. Coming from school, like, what trade barrier? Trade is good, right? Of course, there are complications, but let me get there. Trade is good, the first message. And then at that time, Milton Friedman, I'm sorry, I couldn't come to Harvard, I went to U.S. Chicago. Milton Friedman went to China in 1988. It was a big thing, right? Because at that time, China's opening up, right? And the ruling party, they taught the economists. Milton Friedman in China, the big guys in China talked to him and just open up. Milton Friedman with this great book about monetary policies, about China. So excited. I love Chicago. So I went to U.S. Chicago. I should have not come to Harvard. That's another story. Went to Chicago, get my my MBA, you know, and Chicago was booming. That was 1990s. At that time, you have Bob Fogle, you have like Bob Lucas. Chicago is a graduate school, right? Undergrad, no one treat you like that, right? So, but it's great learning experience. I go to classes as long as I don't cause trouble, I don't stall too now. They let me see in these classes. I have all the economists, great economists. I sat with Bob Lucas' class, amazing, right? About building the economic model from ground zero. Incredible learning experience. I learned that and then equip myself a little bit about economics. Bob Fogle at that time talking about market efficiency, study slavery, right? It's very controversial at that time. Turned out that slavery is not that economically inefficient. Not that he agrees, but it's just that efficient in terms of economic efficiency is not what you expected. So a lot of academic, love to be here. I love to go to school, but I have to earn a living to pay my tuition. So went to join investment banks, Goldman Sachs, work in Wall Street. I was so cool, so proud, young guys, right? And then it's investment banking is a different world. Okay, and then went back to Hong Kong, investment banking, right? And in Hong Kong at that time, changed from a manufacturing trading company to financial hub. Okay, I was working there for like 10, 12 years. I worked in the same district. I may be changing company. Oh yeah, 10 floor up, 10 floor down, different building over there, right? One other thing that I learned about trade at that time is trade is not only about physical products, right? Trade in service is a big thing, right? In the US, we talk about trade deficit, all these things, right? But how about trade in services? How is the balance of trade in the United States in terms of trade in services? Deficit, surplus? Surplus, right? I do a Google. Trade is not only about physical product, also about services. Financial sector is a big one. I know because I think get salary from Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, which is nice. Service big thing. Another thing is that I learn about also, which is more relevant to us here is trade and service also include education. Okay, so that may be another little homework I have to do about what do you mean by trade and education, right? Okay, so you see a lot of international students coming to go to U.S. study, and I would like to highlight to the audience here today is when we look at products, hardware, services is a big part of the economy these days. To a certain extent, we like trading in services. Typically, these are the things you got high margin, right? That's how investment banker make the paycheck, right? And it's a big part of the economy. Trade and service is something perhaps we should also look into. Trade and service also include what? Intellectual properties, the rule of law, right? How can you? We talk about TSMC, Taiwan selling the chips here, right? The chips you buy here, manufacturing costs one thing. A lot of the costs go to R&D, right? So trade and service is not something that we should ignore. It's a big thing. It's getting bigger and bigger. They talk about knowledge economy, talk about AI, all these things, right? So if I may, is trade and services one highlight that we will make the audience to think about. This is something I experienced, financial sector, services, right? Education, that's a big topic. And then I've been working in the banking for so long. Then my mom keep telling people I work in the bank as a clerk, counting money, and after I said, "Oh, that's enough, mom. I got to get a real life." So I changed to the high tech sector. In between, I did a few startup and all that. But I went to high tech sector. I came to Boston 12 years ago. At that time, a Taiwanese company purchased MIT lab spin-off in Boston. Okay, so they want someone to help them manage finances when I came. So I started in the tech sector. Okay, product, physical product. I can show my mom. I have a product, mom. I make this. Finally, right? So, high tech center. So I can share a little bit about my experience about trade in high tech product last 12 years or so. Remember I talked about Hong Kong free trade? This day you talk about this trade framework, this trade pact, right? Let me be honest. The benchmark is that by default, there are trade barriers up here. So much barriers. When you talk about trade pact framework, you're reducing the barriers. But ideally, trade should be free, right? Should be here, should be no barrier. So I think one thing I observe is we talk about all trade pact is not that we make things freer. It's to a certain extent we make things less restrictive. Okay, if I happen to import something, try to ship some product from Asia to the US, do people know about HS code? Import. It's with the tariff. I have a 2-hour session accounting firm. Simon, you want to import goods, you better know HS coding because related to your tariff, all this custom duty, you have to know. It's so complicated. After 2 hours, I give up. Right? There are a lot of barriers and restrictions. That's what I observe, right? So I think it's actually more than necessary that there are ways to reduce the trade barriers to facilitate all this product flow. Okay. By default, it has to be done. The barrier should be reduced. By default, there's not a problem. We don't need this to fix the problem. There is a lot of constraint restriction. We would like to lower the barrier. So that's how I look at things as a company executive. We gotta lower the trade barrier, let it be free. There's so many restrictions, the rules, right? The import document, the custom duty, you happen to fill out the forms, import some product from Asia. I gave up this, that's a problem. Okay, so if I may, right, I think it's absolutely necessary. It makes sense, right? And also, I like Milton Friedman again. He talked about freedom of trade. It also reflects freedom. Right? Freedom to make the choice, freedom to do things. It's a freedom. I may be make it sound too big, but it's a freedom people interact, trade with each other. Okay. Now, having said that, I know there should be some constraint. For example, we should not be trading with the cities or even countries. There are bad practices. Right? I mean, you don't want slavery. I'm not going to deal with a company. We know they are illegal doing things. Same for country, right? If they're not obeying the rules, I'm not going to deal with that. So under the premises, under the assumption there's freedom in this trading part of the country, we should lower the trade barrier. Let it go. I think it's benefit for everyone. Again, back to the Ricardo theory of comparative advantage. That makes sense. All right, so that's my 10 minutes. I hope you have another bit. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. I may be a bit biased, I guess, from dealing with mainland companies and the mainland government for so many years, but I'm a little bit on the Mark Wu side, though, still on this issue of, in the end of the day, yes, tariffs are important, but tariffs have come down significantly, right, between the US and Taiwan. And there's lots of, if you look at Korea, for example, Korean automotive sector, there's FTAs that have been signed. But there's a lot of ways that are not tariff related that you can still protect a market. So I tend to still be on the side of pushing us a bit to, yes, tariff reduction is important, but there's a lot of other things that are probably more important, arguably, in terms of the ability, the need to diversify and the ways in which a country diversifies. So, Ryan, let me turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Edward, for the opportunity to be with you all. My primary motivation for joining was to listen and learn from Philip and Simon and you and the audience. And I've already taken away one important fact, which is that I need to invite Simon to negotiate my contract going forward, because I can assure you I'm receiving 30% raises in my salary. But I want to try to use my few minutes to offer 3 observations about the strategic context as I see it in the United States-Taiwan relationship for trade issues, and then try to put forward 4 tactical recommendations for how the United States and Taiwan can maximize this next 18-month window, 18 to 24-month window to make progress. And if I only leave you all with one thought, I hope it is that I think trade issues may be the most consequential and impactful area where progress can be made in strengthening the U.S.-Taiwan relationship during the next 2 years. But before I get to that, just the strategic context. First thought, my sense is that China wants to isolate Taiwan and increase Taiwan's dependency on the mainland for future security and prosperity. I think this is basically, China's theory of the case for how it can exert gravitational pull to draw Taiwan closer into its orbit. And if we're being honest and objective about this, I think that the Chinese can tell themselves that they are having some success. Over 40% of Taiwan's exports flow to China, more than to the United States, the European Union, Japan, Canada, and Australia combined. And China is limiting Taiwan's other options for deepening trade ties with other partners around the world. Within Asia, Taiwan has 2 substantial free trade agreements with Singapore and New Zealand, both of whom negotiated their free trade agreements with Taiwan after they had concluded theirs with China and received sort of tacit consent from China for them to do so. But Taiwan does not enjoy free trade agreements with any of the world's top 30 trading partners or top 30 economies. Taiwan has been boxed out of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. It is going to have a hard path to entry into the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership. It's been boxed out of even the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. And I think we all know that Taiwan's domestic market is not large enough to support R&D and scaling up of new and emerging technologies based solely upon its own internal market. So unless Taiwan is able to find new pathways to expand its trade and investment flows, it is going to find itself over time increasingly vulnerable to Chinese predation and coercion. So that's the first thought. The second strategic thought is that if the United States doesn't lead the way, it's going to be hard for Taiwan to make progress with others. Typically, other countries feel comfortable drafting off of and following American efforts with Taiwan rather than being the wind shear that attracts Beijing's ire. And given Taiwan's exclusion from other regional trade groupings, unless we take that step, Taiwan risks being permanently disadvantaged relative to its peer competitors in South Korea or elsewhere, who are presently making gains and expanding their trade relationships, both bilaterally and also in regional trade agreements. Third thought is that this isn't altruism. This is mutually beneficial to deepen trade ties between the United States and Taiwan. There is no one side doing a favor to the other here. Trade with Taiwan is essential to the United States' technology competitiveness. It's essential to our global value chains. Taiwan is our 10th largest export market. There is no such thing as supply chain resiliency that does not involve Taiwan. And if Taiwan is not producing advanced chips, the world is not going to have further advances in new and emerging technologies. I think that's just sort of stated fact. On the flip side, the United States' support is critical to Taiwan's long-term autonomy and its capacity to resist that gravitational pull that we were talking about a moment ago. So given these realities, I think it's absolutely essential for the United States and Taiwan to make progress in this next 12 to 18-month window that is parallel to the negotiation process for the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. And my hope is that Taiwan comes out of this time frame with more gains in deepening trade and economic ties with the United States. And I think that there's potential for them to make more gains than the other IPEF partners will during this process as well. So if you accept that as the strategic context, I just wanted to provide 4 very quick tactical suggestions before I turn it back to you, Edward, and over to Phil. The first is, I think it's really important for Taiwan to negotiate directly with the Biden administration and not to fall into bad habits of relying upon Congress to help them overcome obstacles when obstacles emerge. The Biden administration has shown itself willing to resist pressure from Congress when it feels it's necessary to do so. It's worth recalling that over 200 members of Congress, over 52 senators, signed letters pushing the White House to include Taiwan in IPEF. that produced no movement. So that's just a data point we should keep in mind. Second tactical suggestion, it's also going to be important for our friends in the Biden administration to view trade as an area where it is possible to make significant progress with Taiwan at manageable risk for our other priorities. As we think back to the last two major upticks in cross-strait tensions, they both related to symbolic events that Beijing felt challenged their conception of unofficial relations. So I'm thinking of Li Donghui's visit in 1995 and Speaker Pelosi's visit last month. Neither of those had anything close to a trade tie or connection to them. Trade issues have not previously been a source of major stress in US-China relations between the United States and Taiwan. And so given everything else that's going on, I think it's unlikely that trade issues would somehow become a significant irritant in cross-strait or US-China relations now. The third tactical suggestion is that the White House is probably going to have to step in and play a role as traffic cop between the various US-Taiwan trade dialogues to ensure that there is coordination of effort and that they are all mutually reinforcing and helping to accelerate progress. We are sort of a victim of a new problem. 3 years ago, there were no active channels for US-Taiwan economic dialogues. Now there are 4. There's the 21st Century Initiative. There's also the TIFA talks, which have been led by the United States Trade Representative's Office that focus on traditional trade issues. There's the United States-Taiwan Economic Prosperity Partnership Dialogue, which the State Department leads, and it focuses on science and technology, climate, health, and supply chain issues. There's also the Technology, Trade, and Investment Collaboration Framework, which is led by Commerce, which focuses on strengthening collaboration in high-tech industries and supply chains. In addition to all of those various work streams, there's this ongoing discussion about whether there is mutual benefit in launching a CHIPS 4 alliance that would involve the United States, South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan. So given all of this effort, there is going to have to be some serious rigor of thought and discipline in ensuring that all of these efforts are reinforcing and not duplicative or running at cross purposes. And then the final just tactical suggestion that I will close with is that I hope that the United States government prioritizes trade as a top issue, if not the top issue in the US-Taiwan relationship for the coming year. It is the one area that I see where we can make major leap progress in advancing the relationship over the next year to year and a half. And I hope it is prioritized as a central focus of efforts commanding leader level attention and direction. So with that, Edward, I'll turn it back to you and I look forward to our discussion.
Great. Thanks a lot, Ryan. That was wonderful. Phil, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Ed. Let me first express my gratitude to the PECO office in Boston, as well as the Center at Kennedy School. I guess I'm going to also share with you 3 of my observations. The first one is about Taiwan's trade as well as investment relations with China. Okay, traditionally, as Ryan has just pointed out, Taiwan has been conducting very heavy trade transactions with China. Over 30% or 40% of overall exports every year went to the Chinese market in the past 2 decades or so. The Taiwan administration, ever since 2016, has been making a lot of efforts to reduce Taiwan's one-sided or asymmetrical trade dependence on China's market because of all the strategic and political risks involved there. However, we have not seen dramatic sort of slowdown of the growth rate of Taiwan's exports to China. But that's not to be imputed to the failure of the Tsai administration policy, because traditionally, over the past 2 or 3 decades, the market forces have been overwhelming political management or political efforts to sort of balance or change this asymmetrical interdependence between Taiwan and China. So that's sort of the corporate sort of dynamics or corporate inertia on its own that has still prevailed over the efforts made by the administration. However, within the recent 1 year or so, we've seen lots of Taiwanese investments withdrawing from China. And that's closely related to Taiwan's trade to China, because traditionally the basic reality is that Taiwan's massive trade surplus with China is primarily because all of these Taiwanese firms that invest in China are buying or purchasing upstream and midstream products from Taiwan, and then end up manufacturing the end products in China, which will be exported to Western markets. Okay, so together, along with the decrease of Taiwanese investment in China in the recent 1 year or so, there has been also gradual slowdown of the growth rate of Taiwan's exports to China. So that's a basic reality. Okay. Another issue is this, I guess, a widely noted reality about Taiwan's international competitiveness in high-tech industries, especially in the chip making industry. And as probably most of you have known, that major Taiwan's chip making companies such as TSMC have invested heavily in the US, right? But one interesting reality coming to my attention is that TSMC has actually sort of released the sort of report or information in Taiwan that its investment in this version in the US is probably unlikely to make much profit down the road. And why is that? That relates closely to the basic nature or the basic reason of Taiwan's international competitiveness in the chip making industry. Well, one reason is that Taiwan is competitive not because it enjoys some sort of unshareable, unique technology in manufacturing all these high-end chips in Taiwan, but because, first of all, all of the complete supply chains that are basically all located within Taiwan. And second, because of the sort of highly disciplined production labor standard in Taiwan, which sometimes is probably not so amenable to the Western standards, including this country. So these are two prime reasons why. Well, because they have not taken place in the States, so that the TSMC investment in the US, if we do not change these conditions, is probably not going to make so much profit down the road. And this is important because this has been the administration's, I guess, correct policy to join more TSMC and other high-tech firms investing in the US to diversify the production of high-end chips produced globally. Okay, and that's an important strategy to sort of diversify the political risks by just concentrating all of the global high-end chip making in Taiwan. The third observation is the sort of the political implication or strategic implication of Taiwan's trade relations and investment relations with China. Well, in standardized international relations theory, we do know that the heavier interdependence you have between two trading partners, the more peaceful they are likely to be, or the less a chance there will be for an armed conflict between them. But obviously, that's not the case between Taiwan and China, which I think is a very sort of interesting exceptional case in our theory, especially regarding the secure implication of trade interdependence. And why is that? Well, that's because, of course, the political risk, the traditional political dilemma between Taiwan and China. And here, I think there's an important issue I want to call for your attention. Beijing, as well as some of the US international relations scholars, have noted the fact or have argued that it is because Taiwan's pursuit of interdependence to be away from China in the recent 1 or 2 decades that forced China to heighten its military profile, to flex its military muscles, or even to increase the chance of armed conflict or invasion against Taiwan. But actually, that is not so true. First of all, if you look at the public opinion polls in Taiwan, normally most of the time, over 50% of Taiwan citizens prefer to maintain the status quo instead of pursuing either unification with China or pursuing independence. And here we are defining independence as digital independence. That means to legally change the status of the ROC or Taiwan Constitution to be not part of China. Right now, in the ROC or Taiwan Constitution, Taiwan, the area of Taiwan, is part of an integral China. Whereas in the ROC Constitution, this concept of one China also incorporates mainland China. Of course, we know that it's not under the jurisdiction of the ruling power of Taipei. Okay. Well, second, if you look at the policy of the Tsai administration, President Tsai has been very cautious not to pursue digital independence. Okay. But the thing is that the reason why Beijing has been increasingly anxious, part of the reason is that if you look at the identity pattern of Taiwan people, which is separate from the full result of whether you prefer maintaining status quo or independence or unification. The prevalent pattern of identity in Taiwan is that more and more people, especially young generations, hold an exclusive Taiwanese identity instead of, for example, identifying themselves both as Taiwanese and as Chinese. And I think that makes Beijing very anxious, leading them into the perception that the longer they wait, the fewer chance they would have successful unification through peaceful means. So that's the reason. That's part of the security or political implication of the trade relations between Taiwan and China. Well, that's my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Phil. So before I open up to the group, just a few quick questions to seed the discussion initially. Maybe starting with you, Ryan. Bonnie Glaser seemingly argues that, look, excluding Taiwan from IPEF is a big deal, but if agreements can be reached, so if that coordination between the various initiatives that you lay out, if there can be alignment and agreement, and there's consensus and is detailed, they could comprise some future chapters of some type of bilateral trade deal. But the key, I think, there is if the politics become more favorable, as I think basically the language you use. So that married to your your argument around the U.S. leading, how would the politics become more favorable? I mean, you are uniquely positioned to know about the politics of that. What type of shift do we need to see for the U.S. then to lead?
Well, it's a really important question, and it's a really hard question as well. I actually am slightly more optimistic than most inside the Beltway on this question, Edward. I think that over time, countries generally are guided by their national interests, and our national interests compel us to expand opportunities for our companies to flourish abroad. And so, even though we're sort of in this moment of heavy populist storm clouds above us and reticence on the part of our national leaders to advocate for trade, if you look at polling of the American public, there's broad support for international trade. There's a recognition by American citizens that this net serves our benefit. The missing ingredient right now is political leadership, and I don't know when we will have, again, enlightened leaders who are willing to spend political capital in service of expanding opportunities for American companies and individuals to thrive on the global marketplace. But I think that we will, because that's what serves our interest. And the final thought that I would just offer to you for your and others' reactions is it's not like we're talking about, reconstructing the Tyrannosaurus Rex here. This isn't an impossibility. It was just 3 years ago that the USMCA passed on a broad bipartisan basis. So there is a framework in place, a political alignment that can allow this to happen. It just requires sort of top-level push to get us there.
Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, I guess from my perspective, the reason I'm less optimistic, and I could be certainly wrong, is the way that I at least read the Biden administration and particular people within the Biden administration's approach to foreign policy, and particularly when it comes to this region of the world, is it's through the lens of domestic politics, meaning trade, reduction of tariffs. Yes, there's a group that is arguing that, but it seems to me the larger group, and potentially the president himself, views it through the lens of what's the impact of these decisions on the average American and the average consumer. Now, whether those impacts in reality are negative, net negative, meaning I certainly believe that those tariffs are being borne in an asymmetric way by American consumers fundamentally. So the net negatives to us. I think that many in the government don't believe that, right? So if what they believe is for domestic political reasons, maintaining these tariffs and remaining fairly isolated, or at least increasing that transaction cost, does serve their interests, and that narrative of the average American, that it seems to be a powerful way of biasing the way we engage in foreign policy. But that's sort of my take. I don't know whether you what your reaction.
Yeah, I think that the fact that the U.S.-China tariffs remain in place provides powerful evidence to support your points. That this is just a case of domestic politics trumping our economic interests. That's just the fact. And so I wouldn't accept a bet with anyone that we will see some enlightened outbreak of support for free trade in the next 2 years. But I would be more open to a bet if you take a 10-year or 20-year time horizon.
Sure, I got you. Thank you. Simon, so from your perspective, I mean, just so to come from the 30,000 foot to the very much lower, right, to the sort of corporate perspective, how is your corporation dealing with supply chain issues, right? And how are you dealing with clearly or significant rise in geopolitical risk and potential impact on not just, you already had to deal with it in terms of tariffs, right? So that's already happened, but potential, how do you think, and how is it that your board, how is it that your executives are thinking about scenarios moving forward and the impact on your ability to trade and arguably for you mostly goods, potentially services?
This is a great question. That company have been faced in the last 1 or 2 years, right? Supply chain issue. There are some statistics, right? There are about 1 month inventory of product in the ships in the ocean during COVID, right? You know how much money that is? Finance guys, it's so low for time of capital. It's a big issue. And the just in time, we all learn in school, right? Just in time, that's not seem to work last few years, right? So supply chain is a big one. How we deal with it, right? How we deal with it is state economy, production. We talk about ecosystem in Taiwan, high tech in Taiwan. It's all about the ecosystem, friends, partners. Making a product so complex these days. There's so many patterns, components, material, there's thousands of them, right? How we deal with it as a company? We literally about 2 months ago, we have a supply chain conference in Sheraton Hotel in Taiwan. Every year we buy, I don't know, $5-10 billion from our suppliers. So we get together in the same way in the Sheraton Hotel, nice full day event. Dear guys, we are in this together. Your supplier, buyer, seller, it's the same thing. We have to work together to make it work. So we capture the best in the everybody is in the same. We're on the same side, right? So we actually proactively look in the supply chain to work with us together for the long term. That's one. And again, I said, I just come back to Taiwan Sunday. I'm going back in 3 weeks' time. The reason is, well, I'm bringing my customers and my partners from US to go to Taiwan. So all this communication acting together, creating a very tight ecosystem is very important for us to fix the current supply chain issues or in the future, right? It's just so complex, so much component, the whole supply chain globally these days. We need partner, we need the ecosystem.
Yeah. Thanks, Simon. And to Phil, for me, it's always interesting to be part of these Taiwan-related discussions because I'm learning. I am very ignorant when it comes to many issues related to Taiwan, particularly to Taiwanese domestic politics. So Lei Ting, one of our great students here, has been one of the people teaching me. And I'm always curious. I think we tend to, at least those of us who don't focus directly on Taiwan's domestic politics, we tend to discount it. We look at the system level, right? So the great power relationship, or we look more like people like me on the domestic political economy within mainland. To what extent is there daylight, meaningful, real daylight between the DPP and the KMT on any of these issues? And particularly around this question of the immediacy or the urgency of diversification, both of the economy and this end, which is a little different than just simply away from the mainland.
Well, I think KMT and DPP now do share the perspective that there has to be a little bit more on gradual decoupling between Taiwanese and Chinese economies. On the other hand, as I just pointed out, no matter which party is in power in Taipei, the government policy has always had a very limited effect on affecting corporate behavior in China. One of the main reasons why, as I said, there has been a gradual withdrawal of foreign investment in China in recent 1 year is because of declining economic conditions in China, not because of the government's policy in Taipei. Okay, but the second issue that they do share a common perspective is regarding the U.S.-Taiwan both economic and especially security relations. Okay, the Cabinet Chairman Eric Chu has also advocated for a much closer security independence or security relations with the U.S. As he was visiting here a month ago. Yeah. Okay. But even with those, I guess the KMT still tries to maintain the so-called 9/11 consensus, which they think is a very important pillar for maintaining prosperity and stability, right? Whereas I myself do think that the absence of recognition of 9/11 consensus on the part of the Tsar administration has been indeed one of the important sources of Beijing's unhappiness. I don't think that going back to 9/11 consensus is really a panacea for pacifying Beijing's anxiety about unifying Taiwan in the near future. Okay, and part of the reasons, as I said, because Taiwan's increasing dependency among other opinions to be alienated from China. Okay, so I do think that overall speaking, there compared to what we saw 4 or 8 years ago, there has been more issues that KMT and TPP share common perspective than otherwise. Yeah.
Just lastly, just to follow, can you reiterate a bit your point around TSM? So how a company like TSMC, why is it that they fundamentally view that their investments in the United States, for example, will be very low profit?
Okay. One thing is, as I said, the way they use labor, TSMC use labor, including the talented engineers in Taiwan. That's a way not so much in congruence with Western labor standard. Meaning like sometimes the really important engineers may be 24 hours on call, on duty, even though during midnight. Okay, that can happen. Okay, that's definitely not something that we want to see. But I'm telling you the reality is that. Okay, the other thing actually I guess of equal importance is that because of the relatively complete set of supply chains in the upper and midstreams of products leading to the final product TSMC are all still located in Taiwan. We are not sure to what extent most of them would be shifting part of their production together with the TSMC's investment in the States. So and actually part of the supply chains come from Japan as well. So that relates to firms not only in Taiwan, but also in Japan. So these are the two primary.
Got it. I'm looking at you, Meg, up there eventually on this question, because to me it's really interesting around how good really are Taiwanese companies. It's something I think a lot about at true cross-cultural, cross-border management and investment, right? So mainland China is one thing, a lot of reasons why it would work. But then when we look at them in other countries, particularly the United States, not very good at it. So I think that's part of getting a little to what you're talking about as well. Not just labor prices, which are important, but just that corporate ability to really, truly break up that supply chain and actually manage it across large different political economies. That's something that, for me, at least, is incredibly interesting. So let me open it up. I've got lots of different people in this room with lots of different expertise, which we should definitely draw on. And we have time. We've got so remember that we need to, my trusty colleagues, and again, thank you very much to Mark and to Melissa and to Sarah in doing this hybrid. And I'm also looking at you, Ryan. So I always hate being the person like you on the other side of the optic cable, fiber optic cable. However, I'll be looking at you. We have a big screen in front of them, just so you know. So feel free to just jump in, raise your hand. Happy to see you there. So you will not be shut out of this discussion. So just remember, a reminder, make sure you get this mic that's going to be coming over. So, yes, why don't we start? And you just quickly say who you are, obviously.
Thank you. My name is Ariel Kuo. I'm a student at Kennedy School doing my career in MBA, and just thank you for the wonderful panel. I'm from Taiwan. I also went to National Taiwan University, so Xinjiang. My question, I know we talked about deepening economic ties between US and Taiwan, and we also talked about semiconductor, which is obviously the strategic strengths of Taiwan. Some would argue kind of shielding the invasion from China. And we talked about the CHIP Act, which is by design, I think it's kind of moving away of the independence of Taiwan, right, and kind of moving the manufacturing to the states, which arguably is reasonable from the national security purposes. I'm just thinking there is some kind of inherent conflict between the two, right, deepening the tie and also national security on both sides. How do you think about that and kind of philosophically striking the balance and kind of where do we go from here in terms of the CHIP Act and things like that?
Who do you want to ask? Is it to the entire panel, which is fine? Or do you want a specific person?
Yes, whatever.
Why don't let's do this. Let me just gather about 3 questions first. And then, so we'll do, only 2 and then 3. 2 and then 3.
Thank you. My name is Abdullah Fayyad. I'm with the Boston Globe. My question is for Ryan Haas. I was curious just if you could expand on, you said that it's unlikely that trade would become a significant irritant for Beijing. And I'm curious to know your thought behind that, particularly because of the background they gave about some 40% of exports of Taiwan going to China, and that China has had a lot of success in drawing Taiwan closer to its orbit. So if that is theory the case, as you say, how come you think that deepening trade and expanding these trade talks with Biden administration would not be a significant irritant?
Good question. Let's take the last of this one now, right there.
Hi, thank you all for being here. My name is Alexa Brenner. I'm a senior at the college. And I wanted to point to some legislation that's been, really in the news in the last couple months. You brought up the CHIP Act. There's also the Taiwan bill. And I was fortunate to be in the Senate this summer, and I heard a lot surrounding the Taiwan bill in terms of you had people who were saying, wow, it's really time this came out. This is really going to send a message. And then the other half being Taiwan's a non-NATO ally. That's crazy. And you guys have been discussing sort of the U.S.-Taiwan trade relations in U.S. interests, but there's also a lot of fear that, maybe it's not worth the pull at this point. So I'm curious to ask sort of what you would say is a very strong argument, I guess, for defending what many might see as something that's detrimental to the U.S. interest.
Great question. So who would like to begin? Responses to any of these? Yeah, Ryan. So yeah, why don't we privilege you because you're the poor guy on the other side of that. Feel bad for you.
Okay, I'll be the clay pigeon that gets shot out for
That's right,
people
exactly.
aim at.
You're used to that. I think you've had that a few times.
I'll just offer a few quick comments that I'm sure Simon and Phil can build upon. The question about why would trade not be a significant irritant in either the U.S., China, or the cross-strait context? I'm prepared to be proven wrong on this point, but as I look back on the past 40 plus years, trade rarely is a flashpoint or an issue that animates either the U.S.-China relationship or the cross-strait relationship in significantly negative ways. Trade was one of the areas that was carved out all the way back to 1972 and 1979 when the United States and China were in discussions about establishing diplomatic relations. The United States maintained throughout that process that trade is an element of the unofficial relationship that will exist between the people of the United States and the people of Taiwan. And so the expectation has been built into the relationship from the very outset, from the first day of the United States formally recognizing the People's Republic of China. In addition to that, the issues that typically provide the spark to increases in cross-strait tensions or U.S.-China tensions relating to Taiwan most often have a symbolic nexus or a security nexus to them. I don't see why this moment would be inherently different than the previous 40 plus years. The issues that most often sort of set leaders in Beijing off are issues that have high symbolic salience. that the Chinese leadership feels like is challenging America's commitments to maintain an unofficial relationship with Taiwan. Since trade has already been sort of grandfathered in as an element of the unofficial relationship, that is not something that typically serves as a trigger. Elements of the Taiwan Policy Act, on the other hand, potentially could, because they would alter the longstanding practice by which the United States has demonstrated its unofficiality of relations with Taiwan. But I'll stop there, Edward. Thank you.
Okay, so the question is about how the politics, business link together, the trade pact, right? I'm looking from a bottom-up approach, right? What I see day to day. What I see day to day is supply chain question, right? Customers, given all the supply chain issues, customers in the US, companies are asking us to be here. Close the customer, be reactive to the customer needs. You got a request by a client, come here to the US, close the US, work with us. So that's one driving force. Political trade is very important, but from the ground level up, business person, there's a strong drive for us to come here. And a little sharing, right? I actually helped build for my other company, build a factory in West Massachusetts, right? Labor costs 1 to 3, 1 to 5, compared to Taiwan. But why do we do that? Right? I would like to highlight about the national security issue, the chips, right? It's a bigger topic about labor force in the United States. Now, yeah, salary is higher compared, but you know what? Every time I go to the factory, amazing experience. I have a person working on the same machine, not kidding, for 20 years. Every time I go there, the guy said, oh, I'm going to show you how to run the machine. I said, you've been running for 20 years. What's new? No, he's so excited. One thing I learned about labor force, about industry is people in the US, serious aside, love what they're doing. It's also about my previous topic about freedom, right? They love what they're doing. You don't find it in many other places. Yeah, I got to do it. I suffer because I go work 18 hours a day for my salary. Americans, the people, by experience, they love what they're doing. There's a lot of value. You don't see in the balance sheets. You don't see the cost structure. But is it value? It's real value, right? When you have people who love what they're doing, they create a lot of better improvement, which you don't expect from any indirect labor, just go to work because salary. That's one thing I like to highlight. The other thing is intellectual, the rule of law, IP, high-tech industry, the chips. Yeah, we would like to be in a place that have perfect respect to patents. There are set rules about the rule of law. Anything goes wrong, go to the court, resolve issue. We need that. Okay, there's a big advantage of moving our supply chain to the US, the rule of law, because every product, high-tech industry, not the CMC, but I say we invest, I don't know how many hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars in new technology. Okay, production cost is only a small part of it. We would like to be in a place where there's a respect of law, clear rules, enforcement, people who respect the law. Even my team member in the factory, they respect the law. That is true value. Sometimes you don't see on the balance sheet, the cost structure. But I would say this is ultimate driving force also for business to decide where to go. And US is a great place to be.
So let me respond to the question regarding the, I think you're talking about the Taiwan Policy Act, right? Okay. Well, pretty much as everything else, Taiwan Policy Act had, if passed according to its original version, will bring about both benefits and costs in terms of the peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. Okay. So three of the probably most important components in virtual version. First, to treat Taiwan as a non-US ally. Second, to change the name of the technical office now in the US more as like the name of the embassy, right? And third, to request the approval, US approval of any future Taiwanese representative to the US in the same way as the US approves of any other countries with which it has diplomatic ties for recognition, right? Okay, so if all these three pass, particularly that last two, that will, of course, the benefit would be to elevate or to strengthen US-Taiwan ties and to elevate Taiwan's sovereign status, especially sovereignty in terms of international standing, right? But of course, the last two pillars, well, probably also including the first component, would provoke Beijing and bringing Beijing into the belief that Taiwan is getting much more closer to achieving the joint independence, right? So that's very likely, in my personal opinion, especially the last two components, are very likely to provoke Beijing's more drastic actions, probably much more drastic than what we see in the wake of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's Taiwan visit. Okay, so that's my take on striking a balance between all the benefits to maintain cross-stability and to contribute to the U.S. vital interests, which also includes cross-strait stability and also maintaining a sort of sustainable advantage over the all-out U.S.-China competition right now.
We got Jason.
Thank you so much for being here. My name is Jason Hsu. I'm a senior research fellow at Edge Center doing research on semiconductor and geopolitics. Formerly, I'm a legislator at large in Taiwan. So very pleased to see Professor Hsu and Simon representing Taiwan here. So my question is related to security and energy blockade. And this is to both Professor Hsu and Simon, and perhaps Ryan can chime in as well. So from the tech company's perspective, are you worried about the US's policy on export control going from the upstream chips and maybe impacting some of the businesses that other Taiwanese tech companies operating out of China? And I know LCD panels, you do have a lot of production facilities in China. So can you comment on that? And also whether or not the decoupling and the export control is working, and what's the impact on the high-tech sector for Taiwan? On the energy blockade issue, so following Speaker Pelosi's visits, China CCP conducted a series of military drills, and most notably, the area that the drills were conducted will actually form a energy blockade targeting Taiwan. And Taiwan's energy reliance is 40% for import for natural liquid gas. And our reserve for the energy is only 14 days. So if China step up and accentuate the intensity and blocking more for the energy, and this will impact the tech companies too. So on this part, I wonder if that's an issue that the US government would be also concerned and addressing. Maybe Ryan, you can help address this issue. And one final question. So on energy blockade, a lot of semiconductor companies have advocated building for small-scale nuclear power plants in Taiwan. And that's also an issue that the current administration is facing, the low energy resilience and sufficiency. So can you also comment on the nuclear power issue? Thank you.
Hello, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. My name is Salma Kuba, and I'm a junior at Harvard at the undergraduate side. I wanted to actually ask about like the Indo-Pacific and all the countries in the Indo-Pacific. It seems that given like China's strong incentives to a lot of countries in the region, a lot of countries have been really hesitant to support Taiwan, instead opting for one China policy, or even just choosing not to comment at all. So I wanted to ask about, like the impact of the position of countries in the Indo-Pacific on the U.S. like Taiwan relationship, but also just on Taiwan's stance in the region at large and its trade relations with the region. Thank you.
And then we can go back to one of our own postdocs, in fact.
Thank you. So my name is Hong Zhang. I'm a postdoc at Edge Center. So my question is really about the Taiwanese business in mainland China, because Professor Hsu mentioned that some of the Chinese investors have recently decided to withdraw from mainland China. partly because of the declining economic situation in China. We also know, and actually this is probably one of the reasons why it's so difficult for China to diversify its trading relations with mainland China because of all these investments in mainland. And so I wonder what has been the policy to incentivize all these investors to diversify their investment and to go to other places. And that's one of the related strategies that I could think of is the new southbound strategy that's been launched by President Taiwan since 2016. So what has been learned for the past 6 years about this policy and going forward, especially I think in circumstances of the lockdowns in China, and I think that's also making a lot of investors changing their minds where they're going to invest. So are you aware of any surveys that really can tell us like how many of the Taiwanese investors, how are they thinking, what are they thinking, what are they going to do following the COVID, the new situation here? Thank you.
So what do you think? Should we go back to the clay pigeon approach? Ryan, why don't you want to start off?
Sure, I'll just thank you, Edward. I'll offer one very quick comment, but I think this is these questions are primarily for Phil and Simon. On Jason's question about the risk of an energy blockade, from where I sit in Washington, I think that it raises the question of what more can be done and how soon can it be done to strengthen Taiwan's stockpile capacity for energy supplies. Because the current status quo is not sustainable, it's not safe. It's a huge point of vulnerability for Taiwan. And if we've learned one thing from watching events in Ukraine, it's that it's essential for the recipients of attacks to have the capacity to withstand and to persevere and to have endurance, and that requires energy. So I would just offer that as is the one point that I would put on the table.
Just to add to that, I think, the irony, I think this is part of the discussions that we'll certainly have when we go to Taiwan in, I guess it's 2 weeks, almost 2.5 weeks, is the irony there, of course, is a lot of the advances in technology around advanced modular small reactors is actually in the mainland. So that's the other piece that's quite interesting about, I think, Taiwan's predicament. Phil, did you want to?
Let me first respond to the question about Taiwan's investments in China or away from China. Yeah, the Taiwan administration has been launching this new southbound policy, also including South Asian countries, right? But my understanding is that as early as about 3 years ago, the administration has gradually shifted the focus from concentrating Taiwanese trade investment in these countries to sort of new issues such as culture exchanges, education exchanges, personnel exchanges as the new foci of southbound policy. I think to some extent that indicates the sort of lower than expected effectiveness in diverting Taiwanese investment trade to these countries. As far as I understand, I guess many, not most of these Taiwanese firms, moving away from China, either they put their new investment or backtrack the investment back to Taiwan, or they admittedly to some Southeast Asian countries, such as especially Vietnam and Thailand. But they do this not primarily by depending on the benefits brought about by new southbound policy, but by their interbusiness networks or the original knowledge, local knowledge in these countries. Okay. About some of the countries, including the Indo-Pacific, which may not be so outspoken about supporting Taiwan, I guess one prime example is probably India, right? But if you look at India's foreign policy, New Delhi has for decades been adopting this multi-directional, all-out policy that tries to make friends whenever possible to all countries. Okay, especially I guess Taiwan Strait is really not at the core of India's vital strategic interests. So, for example, if you look at the war in Ukraine, one interesting reality is that I guess at the start of the war, India kept purchasing Russian oil when the embargo or sanction has been imposed by Washington, right? But India still has maintained very tense relations with China, though the border disputes have been gradually eased in the recent half years or so, right? But overall speaking, I don't think, well, there has been, I guess, increasing substantive security dialogue between New Delhi and Taipei, as far as I know. But I think that's it. I don't think India is going to be very outspoken about supporting Taiwan. On the other hand, I guess the fact that the US has been trying to make efforts to strengthen the Quad partnership is a very important element that's probably going to have some effect when more tense situation happens in the future. Thank you.
Is it my turn? Okay, I'll try to address all the 3 questions quickly. They're not full answer, but it's some bites. Export technologies outside US, China, and other places, right? Our company literally just completed acquisition of software company in North America 2 months ago. Okay, I was with my coworker, Yuji, by the way, National Taiwan University, very smart people. We complete all the negotiation pricing, we got stuck near the end about the encryption technology. Simon, you gotta make the filing, get the export. You know what? It takes 2 to 3 months. For the MA, it cannot wait 2 to 3 months. The news is out, so it's an issue. But you know what? I'm not complaining. The way we look at it is technology is a property. It's not substantially not different from the ownership of your house or computer. We have to respect that. Okay, technology is a know-how, it's substantial, got value to it. We have to protect the intellectual property rights. Now, it's more difficult to protect, but this ownership, we got to protect it. Right? The way we look at it is, these are real value. It's not much substantially different from a physical product. So we respect the US regulation export because they're real, they're assets. Now, how to do it, I don't have the answer, but that's my response. Energy, nuclear. I'm a mechanical engineer, so I'm not a nuclear engineer, I'm not from MIT. But it's a big thing. For our company, we invest big in solar energy. We actually own one of the biggest solar company in Taiwan. Well, solar may not be able in the near future to replace the power supply to run a fab, right? But we're doing that, we have to, right? So we're doing that already. Our friends Asia Pacific. Taiwanese company, I have been having Taiwanese company make investment in Thailand, South Korea, Singapore in the financial sector. Okay, somehow all these trade, pair, all these restrictions about physical product. Finance, you can go anywhere, right? So very free, good friends. We like to make money together. I was in Thailand for 1 year, South Korea 1 year. I was living in Gangnam style. The sun was not there yet, but great experience. Financial sector, we're all friends. Okay, so I think it also relates to my earlier topic. Trade is not just product, about services. And this is really getting bigger and bigger. We pay more attention in the trade services. It's a big thing. Taiwanese companies in China, I'm not going to make too much comment. We got about more than 10 factories in China. But I do want to mention a few highlights. Company make decision about where to locate production. A lot of it is to do with cost. If you look at the labor cost in China in the last 10 years, right? Well, they're getting better. Okay, actually, in my own personal life, I have non-profits, schools in China, or actually in Boston here, school in Chicago. You can see education, well, that's natural, right? You got better education, you pay more, they're more skilled workers, that's fair, right? As the labor force adjusts, company adjusts, and they pick the right place for their right manufacturing or production. It's just natural. People go in and out. I don't see it's like, oh, let's get a country we don't like. No, I don't think it's that kind of situation. From a perspective, it's really about company trying to maximizing production, maximizing the benefits to all the supply chain, all these things. So if I mean, that's my feedback.
Thanks, Simon. Other questions? Thanks, Mark.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Sophie Falberg-Anderson. I'm a second-year public policy candidate at the Kennedy School. My question is for Mr. Haas. You talked earlier about how there are cases where domestic politics has trumped our economic interests. So my question for you is, how coherent and strategically aligned do you think the suite of US authorities that are regulating technology flows between the US and China are? And what's the right way to think about assessing the effectiveness of those authorities.
Anybody else want to jump in? Collecting another round. Okay. Got David Davis down here. Yeah.
I'm David Davis. I'm the economist of the Vietnam program. After Hong Kong and Ukraine, I think China's hope of getting Taiwan to sign on voluntarily is pretty low. Unless they force it, it won't happen. And the question is if you can keep the status quo or not. And that's tied up, as you've been saying, with economics. And my question is, both China and the US are putting piles of money into trying to catch up with Taiwan in things like, very high-end chips. However, as you've said, and most people know, that's a learning by doing economy of scale game. And, you're way ahead in that. And Intel's price is down 42%, even though it's getting a lot of money. So the market is probably betting that they will not be very successful in the near future in catching up with you. Do you think this difference, in spite of the money, is increasing, or do you think it's going to be about the same, or do you think that slowly China and the US will begin to catch up in spite of all of the problems that they're having? Thank you.
Thanks, David. You want us maybe start with that second question?
Again, it's about country catching up technology companies, right? I don't see it as like China, US, like put the effort beat up Taiwan. No, right? It's just the nature of business these days. I'm a finance guy. I was a hedge fund manager, blah, 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 right? If you look at it, it's just natural that countries and companies in and out. Don't quote me on the data, right? I'm not a bad memory. Historically, companies stay in the S&P 500 for like 15, 20 years, right? I was reading a book about GE, how these days, companies stay in S&P index for like on average, I don't know, 5, 6 years, way shorter, right? I think it's just the nature that these days, companies, the capital market, all things, just people responding a lot faster than before. And if there's a profit opportunity, these days you want to, building a fab for TSM like $20 billion, right? 10 years ago, 20 billion, how do you get it? But these days, $20 billion, no problem, right? So I've just seen the world just moving a lot faster, and the opportunity, countries just move faster. And Intel said, hey, in the US, maybe you should build a factory in fab in Ohio. Was it Ohio? They're talking about, right? It's just natural, right? So I don't see it as countries trying to compete and beat up each other. It's just natural business speed these days. So I'm not going to answer the question, but it's observation.
Ryan, over to you.
Well, thank you for the question. It's an interesting and important question. I have two sort of quick reactions to it, mindful of our time. The first is that it's interesting to step back and think about the nature of the US-China relationship right now, because it's a unique equilibrium. We have deep economic interdependence, rising geopolitical tensions and bilateral tensions, and selective decoupling around, particularly around national security sensitive high technology areas. It's working for the moment. It's unclear how durable or sustainable that equilibrium will be going forward. To try to get to the question itself about the authorities for technology controls related to China, I think it depends upon how you define the objective of American strategy. If our objective is to block China's rise, if our objective is to collapse the Chinese Communist Party, then the existing authorities probably, you would conclude, are not sufficient to achieve that objective. If our objective is to preserve a favorable coexistence that is highly competitive with China, then I think you could make a credible case that the authorities that are in place right now allow us to achieve that objective. The Biden administration is, they view or define the objective as preserving a favorable coexistence with China. And so I think that broadly speaking, they think that they have the authorities they need in place to do that. With a few possible exceptions, I think that they're trying to have outbound investment screening as a new tool available in their toolkit. But I guess that's how I would think about the question, Edward.
Thanks a lot, Ryan. So in the end, I think for me at least, having these kinds of discussions that are measured, informed, and balanced are very difficult, particularly when it comes to these kind of questions. So I want to thank all of you for taking the time to come. Obviously, thank our panelists, all three of them, for taking the time to share their insights. Thank TECO for raising this issue and discussing it with us early on and helping us put it together. And most importantly, I want to thank my colleagues at the Ash Center, again, Sarah and Mark and Melissa, simply because, as you can see, a hybrid can work, but it can be very challenging. So thank you to all of you for making this happen. So everyone have a great day. Appreciate it, and we'll